Hey, what's up, besties? Welcome back to my channel. Oh my gosh, it is so good to be here. So good to be here in 4K, for real. So actually, what I wanted to show you guys was I got a new camera. So that means there will be a lot more true crime dedicated videos on my channel. I did not want to continue making true crime if I did not have a decent enough setup to be able to talk to you guys and basically just kind of chit chat, about things in life. And also, I just wanted to vlog on a better camera than my iPhone. So we're here, we have a good setup, and we're doing great. Thank you guys so much for 400 besties. I love you guys so much, queens. Anyways, so do you know about Myspace? You know about Myspace, right? Basically, Myspace was Facebook, or I would say some sort of social media back in early 2000s. You're always hearing Y2K, early 2000s, Paris Hilton. You're always hearing about all these little trends that are coming back. Now, Myspace was number one on top when it came to social media. Everyone was addicted to Myspace. It was just like Facebook. Now, in this story, we're going to talk about how Myspace played a major role in solving a crime. Can you believe that? Social media does play a very large role in many crimes. We're going to be talking about the murder of Crystal Theobald. Crystal Theobald was 24 years old in 2006. She is a mother. She had a husband, and his name was Juan Patlan. Crystal was a ray of sunshine. Her mom would describe her as beautiful, so smart, so intelligent, so just a ray of sunshine in her life. She said that during the time of Crystal's murder, now that she looks back at things that have happened in her life, she decides to say that things are before Crystal or after Crystal. And because of how much Crystal impacted those around her, you're going to hear a lot about her cousin Jamie as well. Crystal has a younger cousin named Jamie who looked up to her so much. Jamie said that Crystal was always there for her, always playing dolls, always just being so sweet, and Crystal very much cared about her children. And that was actually evident when Jamie said they were playing dolls growing up, like a lot, and she always cared about the baby dolls and being a really good mom doll, which is really cute. Now, Crystal did have 3 brothers, and Crystal was very adventurous. So she was very sweet, very kind, but she was also had an adventurous side to her, and a lot of her family members actually struggled with drug abuse and addiction. So you're going to hear throughout the story about things that her family members may have done, but nothing in the story ever indicates that Crystal was ever roped into that life. And honestly, it seems like she was always begging those around her to get better. She actually left her husband Juan because she ended up realizing that he reverted back to drug and alcohol abuse. So Crystal Theobald actually, her and when she was with her husband, they came up with an idea to have an air conditioning and kind of HVAC kind of business, and they were very successful until Juan decided to go back into that life of drugs, and it's just a very overall sad situation. So Crystal's mother had a previous drug addiction habit of methamphetamine, and then her brothers as well had history of gang violence, burglary, assault with a deadly weapon type charges. So Crystal's brothers and the environment that she was around was very much drug centered, and Crystal's mother actually previously sold drugs. Now, Crystal's family did say that she tried her very best to get her family to stop doing the drugs and being involved in that lifestyle. Now, this actually takes place in Riverside, California, and if you know Riverside, there's a large Latino community, and I am Latina, so when I was looking up the stats, it was almost like 51% and 49% other ethnic groups, which reminds me a lot of my hometown. On February 24th of 2006, Crystal, her husband Juan, and then her brother Justin decided that they were going to come home from doing errands. They got in the house, and then they decided that they were going to get in their car in the driveway, and they were going to basically just go to 7-Eleven around the block to go and grab some snacks, because that's obviously everyday thing. I'm going to 7-Eleven, I'm going to go grab some snacks. So they go to get in the car and to go to 7-Eleven. Now, they do notice that there is a white Ford Expedition basically so close to them, and this is a big car. So they're coming out the driveway and they see the white Ford Expedition drive by. Now, when they see that Ford Expedition drive by, they just don't think anything of it. Okay, it's just a Ford Expedition. Now, they get to a stop sign. The stop sign is in between Greenpoint and Geranium Street. We don't realize in most of the story is that Crystal's mother was actually driving in front of them. And what they notice when they look that there is someone standing outside right next to the stop sign with a firearm pointing at their car in a black hoodie, and he fires off a few shots. All of a sudden, Belinda hears a bunch of gunshots happening, and it's literally right behind her, and that's where her kids are. They're in the car behind her. She's freaking out. She's like, oh my god, what's happening? Crystal gets struck in the back of the head and the back of the neck. Now it's like, who would do this? Number one, they actually pull up to a local little supermarket-esque thing and get out of the car. Juan is there. He's freaking out. Crystal's brother Justin actually grabs her, and he realizes that she's essentially gone. She's gone. And they're kind of like, call the police, call the ambulance, like, help us. Back in early 2000s, and I think about this all the time when I look at early 2000s things, people didn't have cell phones the way we do, hunty. Like, they had Myspace on the computer, but they didn't. Oh, if you weren't wealthy at that time, like really wealthy, you didn't have cell phones, like iPhones and stuff. That's crazy to me. When I was reading the story and I was doing my research, I'm like, why didn't they just like call 911? Like, that is so privileged. If you don't even realize how much things have changed, literally people didn't have phones during the time of this crime as accessible as they really should have. Crazy. Now, Crystal's family did seem to give the police a very, very hard time, and it's just because of over time you gain distrust with police officers and detectives, so they kind of wanted to solve it their way and essentially get revenge on those who committed this crime. Now, when the police came and asked Belinda, Crystal's mother, what was happening at that time, like what would essentially cause this? Did you have any drama in your life? She was kind of like, no, my boys were involved in stuff, but they're not at the moment. I'm not involved in anything, but there is a lot of 5150 gang violence. Now, 5150 was a local Latino gang in that area in Riverside, but the area where they lived was not claimed, essentially. They said it was partially on the line between MD, which is another gang, and 5150. So it's kind of like, if you rolled through that area and you were part of the opposite gang, you were going to get attacked in any way. And that's just how it worked if you lived in Riverside. The police did end up threatening to send Crystal's brothers to jail. They handcuffed them. So it furthered the relationship between Belinda and her sons and the police, because it's kind of like, I don't want to be involved with that. Over time, Crystal's family began to become very more trusting in the police, and they decided that they were going to trust the police because it appears that this is likely not a homicide with intent. It's more of an accidental death because Crystal was not wrapped into anything. Now, in order to identify who would be the killer, Belinda Lane, which is Crystal's mother, said that she was able to see the killer and that he was a light-skinned Latino, a lot lighter than like most Latinos. So she said almost white looking, and that he had a different look to him. Like, I don't know. He was small, very thin, very frail. And when this happened at the time of the crime, Belinda and the detective went through the local yearbooks and cross-referenced with people who were allegedly in 5150, the gang. So what they did was they pulled up the yearbook and they said, okay, this guy's in the gang, this guy's in the gang, this guy's in the gang. The detective compiled all of those guys and then showed it to Belinda. And Belinda did identify someone as the shooter, and it turned out to be a false identification. And when a false identification happens in a very, very big case like this, like a very important case, the detective essentially said there's no way that they can trust Belinda now. Now, I think I previously mentioned this, but gangs like 5150 always get into little turf wars, and they end up fighting over, like, this is my land, this is your land kind of thing. And so that also is what causes violence in gang-related areas. So the detective on this case was named Rick Wheeler, and he was very, very close to Belinda Lane throughout this, even though she didn't necessarily have any trust in him, and then also her sons didn't have trust in him. He decided to remain very, very close to the family and update them throughout their progress, ask them what is going on, what are you finding, and kind of get really close to the family to be able to identify who was the killer. Although he couldn't necessarily trust Belinda's recounts, if they could get any solid evidence from the family, then that would be able to help. Crystal's cousin Jamie, the younger cousin, who is so sweet throughout this entire story, she loves Crystal so much, and you can tell to this day she's still very much mourning the loss of her I would say favorite cousin Crystal. She loved Crystal. Jamie is a MySpace whiz and she's very intelligent. She decides that she's going to create a MySpace and it's going to look like essentially a Latina chola, very pretty, very queen girl boss. And Jamie's going to essentially catfish members of 5150 and see if they would fall for it. So if they would fall for this, she'd be able to ask them questions about Crystal's death and find out some evidence through MySpace. And now this is where it gets super interesting. Like, this is the cybersecurity part of my brain that's like, yes, I need to know what happened next. So Jamie basically ends up speaking to a few 5150 members because her friend Nick tells her. Nick is like, hey, girl, these 5150 members are on MySpace. So she goes on there was a top like 7 or 8 friends on MySpace, and this was top 8 friends. It was top 8 friends on MySpace. You were butthurt if you weren't on someone's top 8 friends. Like, if you were not on my top 8 friends, you're not my friend. So people would get so mad. They're like, why is this person on your top 8? Why is that person on your top 8? It was almost like drama starting if you didn't have someone who liked you or was your friend on your top 8. She notices that all of the top 8 on these people's multiple people in their areas MySpace were 5150 members, and they would have in their little bio 5150 don't mess with me, 5150 this, 5150 that. So what she decided? She was like, oh my gosh, girl, I'm gonna make this fake page named Rebecca, and I'm gonna add all of these 5150 members. She would go to this guy's top 8, add them, this guy's top 8, add them, this girl's top 8, add them, until her whole page for Rebecca was just 5150 members. Jamie starts telling her aunt Belinda about this, which is Crystal's mom, and Belinda's like, it's not happening fast enough, babe. Like, you don't understand. I need to know who killed my daughter right now. And so Jamie essentially says, well, what should we do now, to her aunt? And her aunt Belinda decides, hey, I'm going to make a page with Crystal's photo. I know, it's like really sad. I'm gonna name it Angel, and let's see how many guys. Boom, overnight. The detective Rick Wheeler said it was like guys after guys after guys messaging this page because Crystal was so beautiful, but they don't know it's Crystal in the photo. Belinda and Jamie essentially start asking these guys, what kind of car do you drive? Because they knew that a white Ford Expedition was at the scene. So they're asking these guys, what kind of car do you drive? What kind of car do you drive? And they come across this local 5150 member named William Solito. And William, nickname I'm gonna call him, is Jokes. Now Jokes says that he drives a white Ford Expedition. He is in 5150. With that information about who has a white Ford Expedition and is in 5150, they decided to turn that information over to the detectives. Now the detectives detained Jokes, William Solito, and basically told him, William, what happened that night? William said that him and there's 2 brothers named the Lemus brothers. The Lemus brothers were in the back. And then there's Julio Heredia, aka Little Juero. The Little Juero allegedly got very, very mad because he thought that a local gang was going to attack him or fight with him. So Little Juero got out of the car and was the one who had done the shooting. The Lemus brothers were in the background. Now, Jokes did say that him and the Lemus brothers were in no way involved in this. This was more of Julio Heredia, a.k.a. Little Juero, who did the shooting. Jokes said that they were driving in the white Ford Expedition, just cruising around, and this is very common, just hitting a little cruise, and this car came up and accidentally almost hit their car. So Little Widow got mad and gets out of the car at the stop sign and tries to shoot at them. Now, the detective did say that Jokes was saying that Julio Heredia did the crime, so they let Jokes go because he was able to provide them with some information. And now this was very hard on Crystal's brothers because they were like, he gets to essentially snitch or say whatever and get out of jail? That's not fair. He killed my sister. And so Crystal's brothers and Crystal's mother were so mad. They wanted to take matters into their own hand and get revenge for the murder of their sister and their daughter. I do not endorse this. Crystal's mom went essentially stir crazy because of them not finding who or Julio or anyone else who was at the scene. Crystal's mother, Belinda, ends up doing Santeria on the family. She finds voodoo dolls. She puts pins in them. She drops it outside their house. She ends up doing all types of things to get them. She's pretending to be other gang members on Myspace, saying things like, "Oh, I'm in the gang too. I'll beat you up. Come here and beat me up." And she's telling people to go and beat up Jokes and that he's crazy. She's doing all of this through Myspace to get back at them for Crystal's death. She becomes infatuated with getting revenge. She even said that she had called ICE on them, on multiple members of 5150. She was trying to do anything she could to get back at whoever had killed her child. Now, this is where her sons actually step in. So Crystal's brothers and Belinda's sons step in and they're like, "No, Mom, you cannot go to jail." She plans a June 6, 2006, aka 666 party, and she calls it the end of the world party. And she essentially says that she's going to invite all of these 5150 members, and she's going to bring a gun and find out who shot Crystal and kill them. And she was ready. She was planning this. And this is where her sons and the detective told her, "If you get involved in this, you may spend the rest of your life in prison. You cannot do this. You're interfering with the case, number one. And number two, you're just overall, you're plotting a murder." If you really think about it, she plot a murder. At this point, Belinda begins to realize that she is going crazy. She decides that she's going to hand in the MySpace, give it up. She's going to let detectives handle this from now on. Julio Herrada, aka Little Whittle, was nowhere to be found. It was almost like he had vanished through thin air. The cops were able to kind of detain the Lemus brothers, and the Lemus brothers were able to kind of corroborate what Jokes had said, that Julio Herrada was the killer and the person to fire shots. And since the Lemus brothers were... Now, I'm going to tell you, the one brother, Manuel Lemus, did not speak. He did not say anything. It was actually his brother, William, who did say some things to the police. Manuel Lemus was so mad at his brother for telling the police anything. He knew they were going to get killed by 5150 because his brother had essentially spilled the beans. And so they end up going home and they tell their parents, "We need to flee. We need to leave." They go to Los Angeles. They leave that town because they cannot handle that happening. And what happens is 5150 actually surrounds their house with their mother and father inside of it. And they're in LA now. So their mother and father are in this house. And 5150 lights the house on fire. It was 10 or 12 or 11 boys. It was a large group of boys and people outside of William and Manuel Lemus's house who lit their parents' house on fire. They had to ask their parents to leave Riverside, California because of 5150. Manuel Lemus notices what they did to his parents' house in Riverside, California, how they were going to try and kill his brother, and he decides, okay, I'm going to speak to police and I'm going to let them know just what had happened. Little Whittle, Jokes, Manuel, and William were all on the White Ford expedition, and they were just cruising around near Crystal's house. They noticed another car, which was Crystal's brother's car, drive by. Now Little Whittle, aka Julio Herrada, realizes that that car reminds him of a car that came earlier that day and tried to kill him with his little daughter in the car. They fired gunshots at him earlier that day. So they decide that they're going to chase that car down and get those guys back. Little Whittle becomes obsessed with getting those guys back. So he's basically just driving after them. This is when Crystal and her mother are at the stop sign nearby. And they think those cars with Crystal and her brothers in it and her mother are rival gang members pulling up on them. It's not. It's Crystal, her brother, and her boyfriend in one car. And then in another car is her mother. And they pull up there and they see that these people are in the car at the stop sign. They hop out and end up shooting, and this is when Crystal ends up getting the bullet to the back of the head. The 5150 boys must have mistaken the car that Crystal was in for a car of the rival gang members of MD. The Riverside Police Department actually ends up teaming up with the Mexican Police Department to detain Julio Herrada, aka Little Whittle, and they were trying to sentence him to life in prison or the death penalty. This was very hard on his sister. So Julio's sister was raised by her brother. They were essentially in foster care, almost like taken away from their mother throughout their childhood. Their mom did not care about them. Their mom was on drugs. And so Julio Herrada ends up getting into gang violence, getting into all of these things, and he ends up joining 5150. When he joins 5150, then he starts doing drugs, and it starts getting worse from there. So they have to essentially see, when you're doing the death penalty, it's not just, okay, we're going to put this person to death. You have to worry about, do they have a girlfriend? Do they have someone they worry about? Now, he did have a girlfriend who was pregnant at the time of his detainment and arrest. So they have to think, is that baby going to go without a father? And at this point, Belinda Lane is sober from drugs. She's no longer doing drugs. She decides the death penalty is not what we need here. You can give him life in prison for the murder of Crystal, but I don't want him to receive death penalty, because those around him should still have him in their life. They can visit him in prison. They can see him. But the death penalty is, she didn't want to wish death on anyone. At this point, her revenge era is done. Julio Heredia was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and then they actually couldn't find William Stolito, aka Jokes, at all. He had fled to Mexico, and at least more than 10-15 years after the trial, he was detained and received 22 years for involuntary manslaughter. He actually had a full family and a wife and was working on a farm. Manuel and William Lemus were actually not charged by the police, so only Jokes and Julio were charged. Crystal is missed every single day by her family. She's a ray of sunshine, and I'm going to have some sources in the bio down below if you want to read more about this story. There's also a Netflix documentary about that if you want to watch it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Love you, besties. Bye!